Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I thought I'd do a follow-up video as this Glastonbury fallout is just growing and growing. I've seen that after the Bob Vylan performance, where he was yelling at people for wanting their country back in quite uncertain terms, it's exploded across the mainstream media. It's even on the front page of the BBC this morning. Interesting to note it wasn't yesterday, yet it is this morning. What that tells us is the BBC themselves don't care, but they've seen the reaction to it, and now they do care, or at least they're pretending to care. As I said yesterday, all of this is very, very good, I think, because number one, look, I know it's hard to listen to things like this every now and again. People are sick of being humiliated, they're sick of being mocked, they're sick of aggressive, quote, UK people denigrating their country. But let's be honest, we're used to this at this point. This is another thing in the news cycle that will come and will go after 10 to 15 years of wokeism. It's pretty standard to have people, yelling and screaming about how evil we are, how wonderful they are, and how everything we hold dear and love shall be spat on. But the most important thing why this is good is because finally it does seem, after the insane onslaught of wokeness, which seems to be receding a bit, millions are now seeing the most important dynamic of the 21st century in the Western world being exposed. And nobody's having to do that because the leftist types are doing it for us, because they're exposing who they are beneath things. Now, to contextualize what I want to say in this video, I think it's important to understand human nature. We have a very limited understanding of that in modernity. It's become very ideological, and we tend to split it down political lines, left and right. Now, in one sense, you need political dynamics to feed off each other. The sort of dialectics, start with one, or start with A, start with B, you equal C, and so on. But it's very much a limitation in understanding the true breadth of what a human is. And we have to understand that most people, they're drawn to quite deep values of the heart in terms of how they construct their worldview. Not everyone, but 90% of people. We all believe, in essence, deep down, that we follow justice. We like to follow people who exhibit heroic qualities, those who show integrity, those who express a sense of love. Now, that love may manifest in different ways, and political ideologies may emphasize different parts, but that's what people really live for. When you're on your deathbed, you want to look back at those things and think you had a race well run. And I'm saying this because we must understand that the liberal system, for probably 60 plus years now, has had total dominion over the Western heart. It's had a direct track to it where it's constantly propagandized about liberal positions to Western man. Whether we're talking about Hollywood movies and their feel-good universalist liberal messages, pop music from Bob Dylan to Michael Jackson all the way through to the acts today, which still riff on these same energies. And I've said this before, we're kind of still living out the 60s in a way, but now we're just living it out to its very dark, chaotic and dysfunctional conclusion. And of course the mainstream media too, hammers this liberal messaging. Anyone who thinks outside the liberal mainstream is, a freak, a weirdo, full of hate. That's a big one. And it's very powerful, this, especially when you have a big group consensus around it. You don't want to sort of be outside of what's acceptable opinion. You don't want to be yelled at by someone with blue hair and looked at with suspicion, in your workplace and so on. So most people just get on board with it. This, of course, was just replete during wokeness. At that point, I was leaving the corporate world as it really kicked in. But I had lots of friends in it, and I would say, what do people think about all this, training on why you need to call a lesbian a she, them, and things like that. And they'd be like, everyone hates it. But everyone would shut up because they don't want, that lecture to be fired and so on. It's essentially just one big shakedown. But I think the issue with this is the right wing has really played into this. It hasn't helped itself in recent decades. On one side, it just played the game and tried to detoxify itself, quote unquote, and use the language of the left around, liberalism to be acceptable. They basically did to the right what Blair did to the left. Blair betrayed the socialist left, took it to the centre, but then paid that back in just adopting very heavy social liberalism. And the Tories basically did the same, because they were already economically there, but then they sold out their base, moved away from tradition, moved away from Christian values, and just adopted liberalism, really. I mean, look at a modern Tory. They're just pro everything that's liberal. So the point is, on the one side, the right sold out in that sense, and on the other side, you kind of had this more fringe Thatcherite, embrace selfism, I guess as Pete Hitchens would call it. Everything's about me, individualism, amassing money for myself. And those guys got used very much by the liberal system because there weren't really the solid values of the church anymore to hold people down. So instead it became more about, just doing what you want, Wolf of Wall Street type approach to life. And as I said before, when I was in London, this is why, I was dating some girl and her friend's boyfriend got wind that, I wasn't a liberal, I was exploring some right-wing ideas at the time. We went out for this meal and within about 2 minutes he asked me to explain Margaret Thatcher. Now, you can't blame the guy, but the point is, this is how people are taught. That's what the right wing is, isn't it? It's Margaret Thatcher. Now, I don't have much interest in Margaret Thatcher, but I definitely lean more conservative, even though I don't necessarily believe in the left-right dynamic anymore. But the point is, I'd lean on the more conservatives. I would see it masculine side. But most people have no understanding of this because they've essentially been told that anything outside of the liberal frame is bad. And the liberal frame has also told them that Western identity is bad. And I've explored a lot on this channel. This is very useful for money power, remove people from their own historic tradition, their nation, their people. And really, they're just, movable pawns on a board at that point. Money power can rule all. Social liberalism, economic liberalism, and so on. But one interesting thing about this is human beings still need identity. And one thing the system seems to allow is identity outside of your own identity. And this is probably where you can see where I'm going with this. On the left, identity tends to be with minority, quote-unquote, groups. They're not minorities, really. They're majorities, properly understood. And on the right, it tends to be towards Israel. So you have, obviously, the Israel-Palestine issue. Left, classically, is pro-Palestine. Right, classically, is pro-Israel. I do think that's actually changing a little bit now. You are getting more Israel-critical voices on the right, even the mainstream right. People such as Tucker Carlson, he has a massive audience questioning the logic of why, the right is so slavishly loyal to Israel, even over itself, even over, our own Western nations. But the point is, both the left and the right in the West tend to adopt these causes because they act as sort of a de facto outsourced form of national identity. And both will see their chosen team as a plucky group, against the kind of the evil power structure that they face. And this is why this Bob Vylan stuff is so important, because it's exposing, accidentally, a lot of the biases that lay beneath that. Of course, that comes with not just them laughing at people and saying, F you won't get your country back, but more importantly, the fuss around what they also said, which was their chant, death to the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. And this has really wound up the mainstream right. If you look at GB News, the Daily Mail, they're really on this. Because to them, they're offending something. They don't care about, you won't get your country back. Maybe they'll mention that in passing. What they care about is Israel, because that's where their loyalty is. That's where their identity is. So I think there's something very, very telling here. And this is the first bit. Many people are thinking, well, hang on a minute. All right, you can be pro-Israel, Palestine, whatever your views are, that's fine. But why do you care more about that than what's going on in your own country? I mean, why do we care about the supposed dispossession of the Israelis or the Palestinians, depending on how you see it, when in Britain itself, we are basically being swamped by a globalist system which is enforcing mass immigration whether we want it or not. We've voted against it now for about 25 years, and every time we do, they double it and call you racist even more. Right now, they've kind of figured out that's not working, so they're just keeping the immigration going by being like, yeah, no, we understand your concerns. Of course we do. It's gone too far. Anyway, keep them coming in, But my point here is, this is a very, very important dynamic that I think people have woken up to. And second to that, millions of people are seeing what I would dare say many viewers of this channel have known for a long time. And that's that the left plays on this idea of it being the heart-centered side, left liberalism. It's all just about universalism and kindness, and trying to not see other people as the other, because we're over that. We're in a more enlightened stage. I can forgive you if you're 21 and you're reading Chomsky and all that sort of stuff, listen to Rage Against the Machine. And, it's part of growing up. You buy into it. But as you get older, you do start to see that there's always been a very, very virulent side to that form of leftism. And what I mean is, you can chart this right back to the 60s itself. Remember folk musicians like Roy Harper, I Hate the White Man. That strain has always been there. However, back in the day, you could largely get away with that because, who was Roy Harper? Some folky singing songs about hating white guys, even though he's white himself. And these were fringe things. But now this sentiment is quite mainstreamed, And all right, they will dress it up as, well, we only say these things because you oppressed us. What we're really about is total equality. But we all know that's bullshit. We all know that's bullshit. And we know it's bullshit because when it comes to their own identities, they're very hot on them. They very much want to keep their own identities. And they're told to by the political mainstream as well. Now, I don't, hate anyone or blame anyone for wishing to keep their identity. If you're Indian or Jamaican or Irish, good for you. Awesome. That's lovely. Good. The point is that we are now living in a system where we're supposed to somehow simultaneously dislike ourselves, celebrate our own dispossession, and also celebrate other people's identities, and that makes us a good person. And the point that I'm making at the core of this video is that more and more people are seeing through this. And the liberal system will start doing this now because more and more people are going to see it. They're going to push heavy on the hate. This is what they call Hope Not Hate are for. I'm sure some of the people that Hope Not Hate do exposés on, maybe they are a bit nutty. Maybe some of them do. I don't know. They live with some guy in Portsmouth who reads Nazi material or whatever and owns a crossbow or something. I'm sure these people exist. Yeah, these people are dangerous. No doubt about that. But the point is that the majority of people are not like that. They're driven by the same morality, the same heart-centered desire for who they see themselves as every other human being. But it's the liberal propaganda that, if you like, has dominated the average person for so long, which has stopped them from seeing their own interests, and as well, if we're honest, their own humanity, because it's part of our humanity to have an identity in nation, in ancestry. There's nothing innately hateful about that at all. If you use it as a vector to hate someone else, yeah, okay. But it's not the identity itself that's the problem. It's how it's utilised. And this gets back to the very core of this video and something I am really hoping will start to awaken. I know it's a rough time out there. I know people are scared. I know they're concerned about what the system is doing and how cold and callous it can be, how it lies about people. But I do see that there is a side that you could say is on the right, but I'd say it's more than political. But it was expressed by those sort of classic English/British figures earlier in the last century. And it's really always spoken to me. I'm talking about the sort of classic England, G.K. Chesterton, T.S. Eliot, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. These people who were right-wing, if you like, quote-unquote, but not in this way so it was a sort of precursor to hate other people. They could be very strongly opinionated on certain issues and put down very firm boundaries, but they did so because it created a sense of harmony within the country. And that's what made England England. It's why people travel here and see the cute church and the cricket pitch and the civilization. They think, oh, it's also quaint and beautiful. Well, it comes from that ordering within, which, as I've said before, is sort of, in the Eastern language, a balancing between the yin and yang. It's that sort of conscious masculine force, which, if you like, the wise king energy, which overlooks the country, but the space in there for compassion and heart and so on as well. Now, this is why I think it's so key at the moment. This is the real awakening that's going on. And we have to be aware that this is going to be heavily poisoned by the liberal mainstream. They're going to say all these, it's all toxic narratives. You see this with, as people get more concerned about mass immigration, the liberal media will just hammer, racism is on the rise. Racism's on the rise, don't you know? Because of all these toxic narratives. No, it's not. You've just basically pumped in millions of people into an already overpopulated country with already huge issues, and now issues are occurring. And I'm sure you can find a few crazy racists out there who want a race war, but most people are showing very valid concerns, and they have to make these people look toxic, make them look bad. But my point is that their time is running out with that ideology because their own biases, their own sickness, their own pathologies are being exposed. And this is exactly the case with this Bob Vylan group. They are saying what they're saying, as if they're rebels, but they have the backing of the whole of the mainstream. It's just an explicit version of what the Western world has been subject to for decades now. And this is why there's a rising national and even European consciousness. It's because the political mainstream never listen to their own people. In fact, they actively despise them. And this is the point. Our countries are being taken away. And not only they're being taken away, our political elite ignore us, the media ignores us and just hammers us with more propaganda. And when we have music festivals, we get mocked by these, UK trendies on a stage, yelling at us and swearing about how, F you, you're losing your countries. So this is my point. They are losing their own core of their political positioning, which is their thing is about hearts. It's about, we're the reasonable ones, we're so caring. No, they're not. No, they're not. What they're doing is horrible and has always been horrible for a while. But we've been completely blind to it because we've had the ideology from the liberal regime just hammered to us. But it's being exposed. Yeah, a bit by people on the right, but by themselves. That's the key. So again, the silver lining to all of this is all just a precursor to a reawakening. And as I often say, I believe that energy needs to be the father, the wise father archetype as expressed through Western tradition. That's God the Father. That re-implements the boundaries, cultural, national, social, spiritual, and so on. And once we have that, we'll be able to act in every way that we need to while pushing back against the poison that's basically swallowed the Western world and taken us to the brink of destruction. As I say, maybe we need to go through that brink of destruction now to be reborn as we are. And then we can finally start sorting some of this mess out. Goes without saying, I'm not promoting any form of violence with anything. These processes will happen naturally. But do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. Enjoy the rest of your day. And do check out the sister channel down below if you're interested.